The desert was quiet that morning. Too quiet for a man who'd lived most of his life chasing echoes of violence. Jonah Hale rode alone, his hat tilted low to keep the sun from burning through his eyes. The trail stretched before him in endless ridges of sand and sage, the kind of land where a man either hardened or perished. His horse, a dun mare with dust in her mane, carried the weight of a Winchester rifle, a bedroll, and a bounty hunter's weary heart. Pinned inside Jonah's vest pocket was a folded piece of paper, already smudged with sweat and dust. A poster, nothing new to him, except for the number scrawled across it in bold black ink. $10,000. It was the biggest bounty he'd ever seen. Enough to leave this life of chasing men. Enough to buy a stretch of land where the wind might finally stop hounding him. Enough, maybe, to quiet the ghosts of every outlaw he'd dragged in, dead or alive. The man on the poster was named Barrett Cole, a gunslinger with a reputation like wildfire. Jonah knew men like Cole, restless, proud, quick on the draw, and deadlier with nothing left to lose. Hunting him would mean more than riding trails and asking questions. It meant staking his life against a man with no conscience. But Jonah had been close to death more times than he could count. He had grown so used to staring at it that it no longer frightened him. What did frighten him, though he would never say it aloud, was the silence after the hunt. The nights by the fire when the stars came out and he felt something hollow gnawing at him, a question he couldn't bury. Is this all I am? A man who delivers bodies for coin. That question lingered like a thorn as Jonah rode into Dry Creek, a frontier town caught between fading law and rising greed. Dust swirled through the main street where saloons leaned into each other like drunken friends, and children darted barefoot between wagons. It was a place where men carried revolvers not just for show, where women's eyes learned to measure strangers before offering trust. Jonah tied his mare outside the Rusted Spur saloon, stepped in, and was greeted by the usual haze of whiskey, sweat, and cigar smoke. Conversations died down just enough for men to glance at him, his weathered coat, his boots scuffed by long trails, and the cold in his gray eyes. And then they looked away. They knew his kind. A bounty man brought trouble, but also protection. The town needed both. He ordered whiskey at the bar and unfolded the poster, laying it flat against the wood. The bartender leaned over, squinting. Cole, huh? Man like him, he'll smell you coming a mile away. Jonah downed the whiskey in one swallow. That's why you don't come straight. You circle him. Word is he's got men riding with him, the kind who don't mind killing for less than $1. Jonah folded the poster again, slid it back into his vest. I've seen worse. It was then, when the room began to breathe again, when the card games resumed and the piano stumbled back into tune, that Jonah first saw her. She wasn't dressed like most women of the saloon, no painted cheeks or gaudy feathers. Isabel Morrow wore a simple blue dress with white stitching along the hem. Her hair the color of autumn wheat pulled into a loose braid. She carried a tray of glasses between tables, her movements quiet but sure, like someone who'd learned to walk steady in a world that tried to knock her down. Jonah watched her as one might watch a flame, steady, unblinking, as though afraid it might vanish if he blinked. She smiled when a group of cowhands tipped their hats, but there was something about that smile, a guardedness, as though it cost her more than it gave. Her eyes were green, clear and sharp, and when they lifted to him across the room, Jonah felt something unexpected. It wasn't desire, not the way a man usually looked at a woman. It was recognition, as if she had looked straight through the dust and the blood on his soul, straight into the quiet question he carried. For a moment, he felt bare in a way no outlaw's bullet had ever stripped him. He turned back to his glass, pretending indifference, but his chest betrayed him with a slow, unfamiliar ache. Later, as the sun bled orange across Dry Creek, Jonah found himself leaning on the post outside the saloon, hat low, watching her sweep dust from the porch boards. He told himself it was nothing, just a moment's glance, a weary man's pause before riding again. But the truth gnawed at him. Something about Isabel Marrow had unsettled the rhythm of his hunt. Jonah Hale had come to Dry Creek chasing $10,000 worth of blood. But before the night was through, his eyes had found a woman who would cost him far more. And he did not yet know it.
The morning after Jonah Hale rode into Red Rock, the town woke beneath a veil of dust the color of rust. Sunlight cut sharp through the slatted shutters of the saloon, spilling gold across warped tabletops still sticky from spilled whiskey. Jonah sat alone at a corner table, hat tilted forward, a single boot hooked on the chair opposite him. In front of him, a tin cup of coffee cooled untouched, its black surface trembling faintly with each shuffle of feet across the warped boards. He hadn't slept much. His mind was a tangle of questions that had nothing to do with the wanted poster in his saddlebag and everything to do with the woman who'd kissed him as though it meant life or death, Isabel Marrow. He had seen her face once in the glow of a lantern, and it had unsettled him more than a dozen gunfights. That wasn't supposed to happen. He was a man who dealt in numbers, in bounties, in the crisp finality of a trigger pull. A kiss had no place in that arithmetic. And yet the taste of her, salt, fear, and something unnamably sweet still haunted him like smoke in his lungs. The saloon doors creaked. Jonah lifted his gaze. Isabel stepped in quietly, moving like someone who'd learned long ago how to draw the least attention in a crowded room. She wore a plain gray dress, a shawl draped over her shoulders, and a face set in practiced calm. But Jonah caught it, the flicker in her eyes, the almost imperceptible way her hands tightened on the strap of her satchel. She'd spotted him. She crossed the room without hesitation, stopping at his table. "You didn't leave," she said softly, voice edged with something that wasn't surprise so much as resignation. "No," Jonah replied. His tone was flat, but inside something stirred. "Should I have?" "Most men do." She slid into the chair across from him, folding her hands neatly in her lap. Jonah studied her. The way her posture looked disciplined, almost rehearsed, but her eyes betrayed her, eyes that seemed forever on the verge of either weeping or raging. "You kissed me," Jonah said bluntly. Her lips pressed into a thin line. That was a mistake. Jonah leaned back, chair groaning under his weight. "Didn't feel like one." Isabel's gaze flicked toward the bartender, then the cluster of ranch hands playing cards by the window. When she leaned forward, her voice dropped to a whisper. "There are things you don't understand about this town, about me. If you're smart, you'll take your horse, ride out, and forget you ever saw me." Jonah smirked faintly, though there was no humor in it. "That's the problem. I ain't smart." A silence stretched between them, taut like a noose rope. Finally, Isabel sighed. Her fingers trembled just slightly as she reached for his untouched coffee and lifted it to her lips. She took a sip as if testing whether he would stop her. When he didn't, she set it back down. "You're here for him, aren't you?" she asked. Jonah's jaw tightened. "Who?" "Barrett Cole." The name slid from her tongue like a blade, cutting through the morning din. Jonah didn't move, but inside every nerve went rigid. He'd never spoken the outlaw's name in Red Rock, not yet. He wondered who had told her, or if she simply knew. "You seem mighty sure," Jonah said slowly. Isabel's smile was small, tired. "I would know, because men like you always come chasing him. They think $10,000 will change their lives. They don't realize chasing Barrett Cole is another way of choosing to die." Jonah watched her closely. And how would you know what kind of man he is? The question landed heavy. Isabel's eyes lowered to the table, lashes brushing her cheeks like shadows. She didn't answer at once. Instead, she traced the rim of the tin cup with a fingertip, circling it over and over. When she finally spoke, her voice was stripped of any disguise. "Because I once loved him." The word struck harder than a gunshot. Jonah masked the shock, but inside something twisted. Isabel Morrow, the woman who had kissed him in the dark, had once given her heart to the very man Jonah had sworn to track down. Her gaze lifted, pinning him. "Do you understand now why you should leave? He won't stop until he kills you. He kills anyone who touches what he thinks is his." Jonah's mouth went dry, but he forced a steady tone. "And about you, Isabel, are you still his?" For a breath he thought she might slap him, but instead her eyes glistened, softening just a fraction. "Not anymore," she whispered, "but that doesn't matter. He'll never believe it." The saloon doors creaked again. Isabel froze. Jonah shifted just enough to glance behind her. A pair of men in dust-stained coats stepped in, eyes sweeping the room with the casual sharpness of wolves. Jonah recognized the type immediately. Scouts, maybe guns for hire, and the way Isabel's shoulders stiffened told him what he needed to know. Barrett Cole had already sent his shadows. Jonah rose slowly, tossing a coin on the table for the coffee. His hand lingered near his hip, brushing the worn grip of his revolver. "Stay put," he murmured to Isabel. But Isabel shook her head almost imperceptibly. "No, if they see us together, you'll be marked before the day is done." Jonah hesitated, then adjusted his hat and strolled out, boots thudding against the boards. He could feel Isabel's eyes on his back, burning with words unsaid. Outside, the sunlight hit him hard, but it wasn't the heat that weighed heavy. It was the realization that the bounty he'd been chasing was more than just a name on parchment. It was tangled deep in a woman's past, and now, whether he wanted it or not, in his own.
By late afternoon, the wind had shifted. Dust rolled in from the east, coating the town in a red haze that stung the eyes and choked the throat. Jonah led his horse down the narrow main street, scanning every corner as if expecting Barrett Cole himself to step out of the storm. The two men from the saloon had disappeared into the livery, but Jonah knew their type well enough to guess what came next. Scouts never traveled alone. They were the heralds of something worse. He stopped outside the blacksmith's and tied off his reins. The air smelled of iron and horse sweat. From somewhere behind the forge came the rhythmic clang of hammer against anvil. But beneath that, Jonah caught another sound, faint, almost lost under the ringing. A voice, a woman's. He followed it around the side of the building. There, beneath the shadow of a sagging awning, Isabel knelt beside a barrel, her hands scrubbing at a child's shirt and water gone murky with dust. The sight of her here, doing something so ordinary, nearly unraveled him. For a moment she didn't notice him, her brow furrowed, lips moving in a half-hummed lullaby that carried a sorrow Jonah couldn't place. When she finally looked up, her expression hardened. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," Jonah countered. "Not if Cole's hounds are snuffing around." She rose, wringing out the shirt, her shawl slipping to reveal the curve of a scar along her collarbone. Jonah's gaze lingered before he caught himself. Isabel noticed. She pulled the fabric back sharply. "He gave me that, a reminder of what loyalty costs." Jonah's jaw clenched. "Why stay here then? If Cole knows where you are, you're sitting in the open." "Because running doesn't erase the past," she murmured. "And Red Rock is all I have left." Jonah studied her a long moment. "Tell me about him. Tell me about Barrett Cole." She flinched as though the name itself were a lash, but then she drew a breath, as if bracing herself against a storm. "He wasn't always a monster," Isabel began slowly. When I met him, he was charming, gentle even. He spoke of freedom, of carving out a place where no law could chain us. I believed him. I gave up everything for him. And for a while I thought we were building a life. Her hands tightened on the damp shirt, knuckles whitening. Then came the robberies, the killings. At first he said they were necessary, that the world only respected strength. But it was never about survival. It was about power, about watching people tremble. When I finally tried to leave, her voice cracked. He made sure I'd never forget who owned me. Jonah listened, the image of the outlaw sharpening in his mind. Barrett Cole wasn't just a name worth $10,000. He was a storm, and Isabel had been trapped in its center. "Why tell me this?" Jonah asked quietly. "Because you need to understand," Isabel said, meeting his gaze with sudden fierceness. "This bounty, it isn't money. It's a death sentence. You won't survive him, Jonah. No one does." Jonah stepped closer until the dust settled like a veil between them. "Maybe not, but somebody's got to try." Their eyes locked, the space between them charged with something unspoken. For an instant, Jonah thought of reaching for her hand, of promising more than he had any right to. But before he could speak, the clang of hooves echoed down the street. Both of them turned. Through the swirling red dust rode a lone figure. Not Barrett Cole yet, but a messenger, unmistakable in the black scarf tied across his face and the rifle slung across his back. He slowed his horse outside the saloon, scanning the town with a predator's patience. Isabel's breath hitched. "It's starting," she whispered. Jonah felt it too, the tightening of the noose, the invisible weight of fate drawing him toward the fight he'd been chasing. Except now, it wasn't just his bounty, it was her life. And he knew with the grim certainty of a man who'd outlived too many choices that once he stepped into this, he would never walk away clean. He looked at Isabel, her hair tangled with dust, her eyes wide with fear and something softer beneath it. "Stay close," Jonah said. And though she didn't answer, she didn't step away either. The storm had come to Red Rock, and Jonah Hale was no longer just a bounty hunter. He was a man caught between $10,000 and the price of a kiss he hadn't yet begun to pay.
The night Red Rock changed forever began with a restless silence. Jonah had been riding the edges of town all day, circling like a hawk, waiting for a ripple of trouble. The bounty posters had told him where Barrett Cole had last been sighted, near Abilene, 2 counties north. But bounties were slippery things. Men like Cole didn't leave trails unless they wanted you to follow. What Jonah hadn't expected was how Red Rock itself seemed to brace, like a herd sensing the cougar before the rider sees its eyes in the brush. It was a little after dusk when the piano in the saloon fell quiet mid-song. Jonah had been leaning near the rail outside, smoking slow, when the silence reached him. Saloon pianos never stopped in Red Rock, not unless the player's hands had frozen or someone had taken the air from the room. Jonah stubbed out the smoke, pushed the batwing doors open, and scanned the crowd. Isabel was there, dressed in a velvet shade of green that caught lamplight and made her look less like a woman surviving in Red Rock and more like a queen dethroned. She was laughing, too loudly, too forcedly, at something the barber said. But Jonah knew her laugh now. It was armor. The reason for the silence stood in the doorway behind him. Barrett Cole. Jonah knew before the room even breathed his name. The man fit the posters, tall, black duster trailing dust, hat-brimmed shadowing eyes that had burned too many lives out of their bodies. A revolver rode his hip like it had grown there. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't frowning either. It was a calmness Jonah had seen in rattlesnakes coiled by a rock, waiting for a boot heel. Barrett's gaze swept the saloon, not searching, but claiming, and when it landed on Isabel, the forced laugh shattered into silence. "Evening, Belle,"
Barrett said, voice smooth as aged whiskey. No one called her Belle. Not here. Not since Jonah had met her. Jonah's hand twitched near his holster, but Isabel's eyes darted to him, sharp, warning, don't. She rose slowly, skirts whispering like a secret the room already knew. You shouldn't have come here, Barrett. Her voice held strength, but Jonah could hear the tremor buried in the syllables. Barrett took 2 steps closer, and the crowd parted like wheat before the wind. Shouldn't have. I reckon I should have never let you walk away. $10,000 is just business, sweetheart, but you? He paused, tilted his head, smile cut across the stillness. You are unfinished business. Jonah stood then, full and deliberate, hand on the worn butt of his Colt. His voice was calm, but it carried. Cole. Barrett's eyes shifted, landing on Jonah like a blade finding flesh. For a heartbeat, the 2 men measured each other. Jonah's reputation had spread far enough. He wasn't unknown, but Barrett Cole was more than a name on a poster. He was a storm. And you are? Barrett asked. Jonah Harlow, the man they sent to collect you. A ripple of tension rode the saloon. Some men edged toward the door. Others held their breath. Barrett's laugh was low, dangerous. 10,000 reasons to try, huh? Jonah didn't blink. One reason more important than that. His eyes flicked toward Isabel before he caught himself, but Barrett saw. Of course he saw. The smile grew sharper. Ah, Belle's already given you her kiss, has she? Poor fool. The moment threatened to break into gunfire, but Isabel stepped between them, her voice steady but desperate. Stop this, both of you. Barrett, you came here to prove something. Don't make Red Rock your grave. Barrett leaned close enough that Isabel stiffened, though her chin stayed high. You talk like you don't remember the nights you begged me not to leave your side. Tell me, Belle, does he know the truth? Isabel's face paled, her hand faltering against her skirts. The truth. Jonah saw it. There was more between her and Barrett than she had admitted. Barrett chuckled darkly, tipped his hat, and stepped back toward the door. I'll be seeing you, Harlow. You too, Belle. Don't wander too far. Sometimes the past has a way of catching up. Then he was gone, swallowed by the cool desert night, leaving the saloon buzzing with the silence he had carried in. Jonah's hand relaxed off the Colt, though his heart still hammered. He turned to Isabel, but she was already gone, vanished through the back hall. And Jonah knew Red Rock was no longer just a job. It was a fault line, and Barrett Cole had just stepped on it.
The desert wind carried the smell of sage and dust when Jonah found Isabel later that night. She was standing near the outskirts of town, staring at the empty horizon where Barrett had disappeared. Lantern light from the saloon flickered faint behind them, but here there was only moonlight and the whisper of old confessions. You should have told me, Jonah said quietly, approaching slow, like a man approaching a wounded mare. Isabel didn't turn. Told you what? That I once belonged to him? That the man you're hunting is the same man who nearly ruined me? Her voice cracked, but sharpened again, a blade honed on pain. Jonah clenched his jaw. Belonged ain't the word I'd use, but it matters. If I'm to stand between you and him, I need to know. She faced him then, eyes shimmering with anger and something deeper. You don't understand, Jonah. Barrett wasn't always a monster. Once he was kind. Or maybe I was too blind to see the rot beneath. I followed him, believed in him. And when he showed the world his true face, it was too late. I'd already given him everything I had to give. My name, my trust, my love. Jonah felt something tighten in his chest. And your kiss. She flinched, as if he'd struck her. Don't mock me. I ain't. His voice was low, steady. But I need to know, Isabel. When he called you Belle, what did that mean? Her eyes drifted away, toward the desert dark. It was the name he gave me when he wanted me weak, when I was his. I swore no one would ever call me that again, until tonight. Jonah stepped closer, close enough to feel the chill off her skin. Then we make sure tonight was the last time. For a long breath, neither spoke. The moon carved silver across her cheek, catching the tracks of a tear she didn't bother to wipe. "Jonah," she whispered finally, "you don't know what he'll do. Barrett doesn't fight fair. He burns everything he can't own." Jonah's voice was a promise carved from stone. "Then let him try. Red Rock's mine to guard now, and so are you." Isabel searched his face, torn between the weight of old wounds and the fragile thread of new hope. She wanted to believe him. Maybe part of her already did. But she knew Barrett Cole, knew his cruelty, his patience. A man like that didn't walk into a saloon just to tip his hat and vanish. No. He was setting the stage. And Jonah, whether he admitted it or not, had just stepped into the role Barrett wanted him to play. The night stretched silent, heavy with a storm yet to break. Isabel's hand trembled before it found Jonah's sleeve, gripping just enough to steady herself. "Promise me," she whispered finally. Jonah laid his other hand gently over hers, steady and firm. "I promise." But in the dark, beyond Red Rock, Barrett Cole was already watching.
The desert was shifting under Red Rock's feet. It wasn't sudden. Barrett Cole never announced himself with a single strike. He seeped into a place like water into stone, slow at first, then inevitable. It began with rumors, cattle missing from the southern ridge, a rider glimpsed on the horizon wearing a black coat that gleamed like tar. Then came the messages, slipped under doors or carved into barnwood. "The law don't hold here. Barrett does." One morning, the bank doors were found ajar, the safe untouched, but the ledgers gone. By noon, word had spread that Cole's riders had burned 2 homesteads along the river, leaving families alive but terrified, their walls charred with a single mark, a slash of cold black soot, Cole's signature. The sheriff tried to rally men, but few wanted to raise rifles against a name whispered with more fear than rattlers in boots. Jonah walked through it all like a man with shadows pressed against his ribs. He knew a storm when he smelled one. Every set of eyes on Main Street flickered to him, as if the town expected him to be the lightning rod, the one to draw Barrett's fury before it broke over the rest of them. He'd been many things, outlaw, hunter, drifter, but never a savior of towns. Isabel felt the noose tightening too. She served drinks with a steadiness that belied the tremor in her hands, her face calm as she wiped the bar while whispers crawled around her. Men said Barrett's riders drank whiskey in her parlor once, that maybe she'd known him better than she let on. Jonah noticed her silence whenever Cole's name rose in conversation, the way her lips pressed thin like someone holding back a truth too heavy to spit out. That evening, Jonah stepped into her saloon after dusk. The lamps burned low, shadows stretching long across the scarred floor. Isabel stood behind the bar, a ledger open but untouched. She didn't look up when Jonah leaned an elbow on the wood. "He's drawing closer," Jonah said quietly. "I know." Her voice was soft, but in it was the echo of old wounds. "You planning to tell me what kind of history you got with him?" Her eyes lifted then, dark and raw. "What would it matter if I did?" Jonah didn't answer right away. Outside, a horse snorted, iron shoes clattering on stone. He finally said, "It matters because he's not after this town. He's after something personal, and I got a feeling that something's standing right in front of me." Isabel's fingers stilled on the glass she was polishing. Her throat worked once before she set the glass down with a soft click. "Barrett Cole wasn't always the devil you hear about. Once he was just a man with a broken dream, and she faltered.
She turned, pouring herself a measure of whiskey, but not drinking. I was the fool who thought I could fix him. Jonah felt his stomach knot, though he forced his face to stone. He'd known she had a past. Everyone did out here. But the thought of her lips once belonging to Cole, her laugh once warm in his fire, tasted bitter as gunpowder. He loved me, Jonah, or at least I thought he did, until the day he proved he loved power more. Her eyes glistened but did not fall. He told me once that if the world wouldn't give him a kingdom, he'd take it piece by piece. I was just the first piece he claimed. Jonah leaned back, the words cutting through him like a spur. The air between them thickened until Isabel finally whispered, "That's why he's here. Not for gold, not for land, for me, and for the man who dares to stand beside me." Jonah said nothing. He only reached for the whiskey bottle, poured 2 fingers into his glass, and swallowed it whole, the burn easier than her confession.
The raids worsened in the weeks that followed. Barrett's men rode into Red Rock at night, firing shots in the air, riding circles in the dust until children woke screaming and men stood helpless on their porches with rifles they never raised. Each time, they left without blood, but with a heavier weight of fear. It was a message. I own you. You just don't know it yet. One afternoon, Jonah found a stallion tied to the hitch outside the saloon. It was coal black, its saddle too fine for a drifter, its eyes wild with the scent of violence. Inside, the room had fallen to silence. A single man sat at a corner table, his hat tipped back, boots up, sipping whiskey with the ease of a man at home. Jonah knew before Isabel's stiffened posture gave her away. Barrett Cole. He wasn't larger than life, few men were, but he carried himself like someone who knew the earth bent when he pressed a boot to it. His coat was black, his jaw sharp, his grin a knife without polish. "Jonah Hale," Cole said, his voice smooth as oiled leather. "I was hoping Red Rock would have the good sense to offer me a welcome, but I suppose you'll do." Jonah's hand itched toward his coat, but he kept it steady against the bar. "If you're looking for trouble, you'll find it." Cole's grin widened. "Trouble? No. I'm looking for a woman who forgot where she belongs." His eyes slid to Isabel, and Jonah felt the air leave the room. Isabel's voice broke the silence, low and cold. "You don't own me, Barrett." "Don't I?" Cole rose from his chair, every motion deliberate, as if he knew the room was watching. He walked closer, until only the bar separated them, his eyes burning through Jonah like fire through brush. $10,000 they're paying for my head, bounty hunter. That's why you're here, isn't it? Jonah's jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. Coles chuckled darkly. "Go ahead, try, but understand this. Every time you raise that gun against me, a piece of Red Rock pays the price. A barn here, a family there. You draw on me, and your precious lady here will watch this town burn around her." He reached out then, slow and cruel, brushing his fingers along Isabel's cheek as if testing Jonah's restraint. Jonah's hand twitched, but Isabel, her face pale, shook her head just enough to hold him still. Cole leaned in, close enough for Jonah to smell the whiskey on his breath. "This ain't about bounties anymore. It's about who she belongs to." Then he was gone, boots echoing across the floor, spurs jingling like iron laughter as the door swung shut. The silence he left behind was heavier than gun smoke. Jonah stood frozen, his fist white around the bar's edge. Isabel's breath came fast, her shoulders trembling, though her eyes burned with defiance. Jonah looked at her then, the truth laid bare. There was no escaping the storm. Barrett Cole would grind Red Rock into dust until he got what he wanted, and what he wanted was standing right between them.
The morning Red Rock woke under the weight of silence. It was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of fear. Doors stayed closed, curtains drawn, Boots shuffled only when they had to, and every man kept his hand close to a rifle rack. Barrett Cole's men had carved their message deep into the town. 3 ranches raided, wagons set aflame, a boy left beaten and tied to a corral post as a warning. He had done it not because he needed to, but because he could. Jonah could see it in every trembling eye, that Barrett had almost won before the final fight even started. Fear was his sharpest weapon. Jonah walked down the dust-blown street with his hat pulled low. Every porch board creaked under the weight of people watching him, not with trust, but with the desperate hunger of people who needed someone to fight in their place. The bounty hunter who had come to town for $10,000 had become the only thing standing between them and ruin. He hadn't asked for it, but here it was. The sheriff's office smelled of coffee gone stale and gun oil. Sheriff Lane sat hunched at his desk, face gray with sleeplessness. "He's making his move tonight," Lane muttered. "Words he's coming for the bank, break the town's back in one swing. I can't hold a line with 6 men, and half of 'em green." Jonah set his rifle across the desk. "Then you won't hold it alone." Lane's tired eyes flickered. "You've no reason to throw yourself into this, McGraw. You ride away tonight, no one would call you coward." Jonah's jaw worked tight. He thought of Isabel standing in her saloon doorway the night before, candlelight touching her face, her eyes shining not with fear, but with something harder, resolve. She had told him the truth then. Barrett had not just been a shadow of her past. He had once been her captor. She had lived in his world of knives and hunger, survived by wit and submission until she ran. She had changed her name, changed her life, built this fragile corner of freedom in Red Rock. And now Barrett had come for her, like a wolf who never forgot the taste of blood. "I've got a reason," Jonah said, low. That night the wind rose hard off the mesa, carrying dust across the starlit streets. Lamps burned low in every window. Jonah stood at the heart of Red Rock with rifles slung and pistols tied down. The townsfolk had gathered, quiet behind him. Ranchers, blacksmiths, clerks, women with their sons clutched close. He had seen this before in towns that broke before the fight began. But something in Red Rock held. Maybe it was Isabel standing among them, refusing to hide. Maybe it was the knowledge that if they yielded once, they'd yield forever. The first rider came like a scout of death, then 10 more behind him, then 20. Barrett Cole rode at the head, his hat brim casting his face in shadow, his coat long and dark like a crow's wing. His men fanned wide, rifles catching starlight. They came not as thieves, but as soldiers laying claim. Jonah stepped forward into the dirt, alone. "Cole!" His voice carried like a hammer crack. "It ends here." Cole reined up, and when he raised his head, Jonah saw the grin cut across his face, wolfish and slow. "McGraw, I thought you'd be long gone with your tail tucked, but here you are, wearing the town's noose. And there she is, my runaway dove." Isabel's hand tightened around the rail, but she did not flinch. "I'm not yours," she said, steady. "Not anymore." Barrett laughed, cruel and sharp. "You think this stray gunman saves you? He ain't your chains, darlin'. He's just another man to bury." Jonah felt the town's breath catch. Every finger hovered near a trigger, but this was not yet a battle. This was a choice. He stepped closer, boots scuffing dust. "You came here for a bounty," Jonah said, voice low but carrying. $10,000 on your head, Cole. You can ride out now, and maybe you keep breathing, or you push this line, and I swear you won't see another dawn." Barrett's eyes narrowed to slits.
You talk bold for a man who's already lost. I don't just want the money in that bank, McGraw. I want what's mine. And her? He jabbed a finger toward Isabel. She belongs to me. A murmur ran through the townsfolk. Isabella's face did not move, but her eyes shone, full and unbroken. She shook her head once, small but certain. And Jonah realized then it wasn't just about bounty or survival or even revenge. It was about her, about making sure no man, no past, no chain could ever take from her what she had built. He raised his rifle. Then come and take it. The first shot split the night. Chaos tore loose. Barrett's riders spurred forward, rifles blazing, bullets snapping splinters from beams and smashing windows. Jonah dropped to one knee, firing clean into the front ranks. A man toppled from his saddle, then another. The townsfolk rallied, a sudden roar of defiance, gunfire flaring from porches, from rooftops, from alleyways. Barrett had thought to break them with fear. Instead, they rose like a wall of flame. Jonah fought like a man with nothing left to lose but the woman at his back. Smoke filled the air, horses screamed, bullets hissed past close enough to tear cloth. Beside him, Lane's deputies held the line, grim and steady. Isabel, against Jonah's orders, fetched rifles from the saloon, handing them to trembling shopkeepers, turning them into soldiers. Barrett rode through it all, untouched, his pistol cutting men down with precise cruelty. He moved like a shadow no bullet could pin. Jonah tracked him, waiting, steady, through the storm. Then their eyes locked across the haze.
Time slowed. Jonah rose, rifle braced, sight steady on Barrett's chest. But a shot cracked from the side, burning fire across his shoulder, spinning him half around. He staggered, teeth clenched, rifle slipping. By the time he caught himself, Barrett had dismounted, walking through the dust like a man stepping into his own house. They faced each other in the churned dirt of Main Street while the battle raged around them. Barrett's grin was gone now. His eyes burned with something darker. You're just like all the others who tried to stand in my way. Dead men with good intentions. Jonah's breath came ragged, blood wetting his sleeve. And you're just a ghost hanging on too long. Their pistols cleared leather as one. The crack of gunfire rolled like thunder through the street. Jonah felt the slam of recoil, the searing streak of another round grazing past his ribs. Barrett staggered, teeth bared, but kept coming. Again their pistols flared. Again the night lit with fire. The third shot decided it. Barrett's weapon spun from his hand, fingers shattered. He dropped to his knees, clutching his chest where Jonah's bullet burned through. The outlaw gasped, blood bubbling his lips. He looked up once more, not at Jonah, but at Isabel. "You were mine," he rasped. Her face was calm, her voice quiet. "I was never yours. I was only surviving you." And Barrett Cole fell, dust rising around his body, his reign of terror broken at last. The silence after was heavy, broken only by the crackle of flames and the soft sob of relief from townsfolk. One by one, Barrett's riders dropped their guns, eyes hollow, spirit gone without their master. The town had held. Against all odds, they had held. Jonah stood, swaying, pain clawing at him until Isabel was suddenly there, her hands on him, her eyes wide with fear that he might yet fall. He caught his wrist gently, his voice hoarse. "It's done. You're free." She shook her head, tears spilling now, not of fear, but of release. "No, Jonah, we're free." And in that moment, with the town rising around them, with the stars burning fierce above, Jonah knew the truth he had been running from since the first kiss had stolen the ground from under him. He had not just fought for Red Rock, he had fought for her and for himself.
for a chance at something worth more than $10,000, more than any bounty, more than the weight of his own restless past. He bent his head, and when their lips met, fierce, trembling, alive, it was not the kiss of a stolen night. It was the kiss of survival, of defiance, of two people who had beaten back the dark and claimed the dawn as their own. The dust of battle still lingered over Red Rock, faint wisps swirling in the evening wind like restless ghosts. Barrett Cole lay cold in the earth beyond town, but his shadow had not vanished. It clung to the streets, to the frightened eyes of those who survived, to the scorched boards of saloons where laughter had been replaced by silence. Jonah stood on the edge of Main Street, hat low, rifle resting across his arm. He should have been riding out that morning. That was the way of men like him. Follow the trail, take the bounty, leave before the ground cooled beneath his boots. And yet, for the first time in years, his horse stood saddled but waiting, because he was not ready to go. Isabel came from the chapel, where a few townsfolk had gathered to lay flowers for those lost. Her black dress was simple, her eyes weary but not broken. She stopped beside Jonah, looking at the horizon where the sun bled red into the desert. "You're still here," she whispered. Jonah's jaw flexed. "Reckon I don't know where else to be." Her hand brushed his, tentative, uncertain, as if she feared he might vanish into dust like all the other men who had ridden through her life. But he didn't move. For once, Jonah Hayes was still. Behind them, Red Rock was stirring again. Men hammered boards across shattered windows. Children chased each other in the street, their laughter hesitant, like testing whether joy was safe here again. Sheriff Maddox limped past with his arm in a sling, tipping his hat toward Jonah. The townsfolk were starting to see him not as a drifter or bounty hunter, but as a man who had stood between them and ruin. But the cost lingered. Barrett's men had taken lives, burned homesteads. Graves dotted the hill beyond town, and Jonah knew, deep down, there would be no true peace in a land like this. Not really. The West always exacted a price. Isabel turned her face toward him. "You could leave, Jonah. No one would hold it against you." He studied her, the scar of her past with Barrett still etched in her eyes, the resilience that kept her standing anyway. She was both wounded and unyielding, and he realized he wasn't staying for the town, nor for redemption. He was staying because of her. "I've been running most of my life. Maybe it's time I stopped." For a moment, Isabel's lips trembled as though words failed her. Then she leaned against his shoulder, letting out a breath that seemed to carry years of fear away. The two of them stood there as the last rays of sun painted Red Rock in fire and gold. A new chapter was beginning, not one free of hardship, not one promised with safety, but one rooted in choice. Jonah Hayes, the man who once measured worth in bounties, had chosen to anchor himself in a place scarred by violence, but stitched together by hope. The wind carried the sound of hammers, of voices slowly daring to laugh again. Red Rock would rebuild. Jonah and Isabel would endure. And though the West would never let them forget the blood it had taken, it also offered them the fragile, fleeting grace of a tomorrow. Not a perfect ending, but a real one, the kind the frontier gave to those who survived it.